right, we're 5 minutes in, so let's get started, and if others join us, that's great. Otherwise, I just wanted to welcome everyone to our Building Compassion series. So we decided to create this series to increase awareness, build compassion for our members in the community, and create a safe space to ask questions. So please type in the chat box if you do have any questions. Feel free to add comments. I read them throughout and I try to engage everyone as much as possible because I think that is the best way, is to have an open dialogue about what we're chatting about. And if I go too fast, just type the words too fast because I do get so excited about sharing. And I mostly share on my point of view as a woman who lived in generational poverty, has experienced poverty, who's been homeless, who has gone without food, who, there's many things in my life that I'm open to share because I want others to sort of understand in a safe space. So ask any question and I will share it. So let's begin by sharing our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are Zooming to you from the region of Muskoka, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. YWCA commits to not only acknowledge this, but to also learn and educate ourselves, to create opportunity and honor sacred places, and to take actions towards real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations. We want to acknowledge that we're deeply committed to making space and listening to those who are marginalized. As an organization, we know that we all have much to learn about racism and anti-oppression, and we believe we have a responsibility to educate ourselves in order to better understand the role we can play in creating a more equitable society. So I can introduce myself. So my name's Kelly Jones. I identify as she, her. I am a single parent of a 19-year-old and a 9-year-old. Yes, that is a big age gap, and no, they don't get along. My 19-year-old is actually just about on her way to moving to the big city, and it has been put on pause because of COVID. And so this is a big stepping stone for her. I myself was out of our home at 16. I grew up in pool halls all across Canada. My dad raised my younger sister and I. My mom is an alcoholic, and my dad decided that that wasn't a life that we needed to be around because we were put in many foster homes when he would be on tour somewhere playing his snooker. And when he would come home, we would be in a foster home. So he never knew where we were going to be. And it was just too stressful for him. So taking us out of the home he thought was the best option. So I actually don't have my camera on today. My hair's a mess and I don't want to share it. so you can see my Gap logo, but my photo's here. So that's what I look like when my hair is done up. So yeah, when growing up with a dad who was pretty much angry to have to take over 2 daughters, not knowing how to do it, and his childhood wasn't the greatest either. He came from a family of 5, as from a single mom as well. And so really not having a proper father figure, not knowing what a man in society, I guess the could come out, should look like, he sort of winged it. And how do you wing raising 2 daughters without a skill set other than playing pool? And so when I was 13, he was actually in a horrific car accident, and he was dating someone at the time, I think only 3 months in, and she ended up taking us in. And even that wasn't a stable life. She wasn't very kind to me, specifically being the older one, because I asked questions. I'm a question asker. And she had 2 kids herself, and it was just messy. It was a messy childhood. I moved probably to, I would say, 12 different schools growing up. When we were 13 and my dad actually came out of that car accident and wanted a better life for us, we moved here to Muskoka. And I remember attending Huntsville High School and just in awe of how gorgeous this place was. And within 6 months, my dad shared that we would be moving again. I remember crying because I had never seen such a beautiful little town with all the lakes and the trees, and just, it felt like peace here to me. And I vowed, I remember walking down on lunch hour to the pizza down across the bridge, or from the bridge. And then I walked over to the bridge, and I remember staring out into the water and saying, I will be back one day. I have to be back here one day. And my journey to get here wasn't as smooth as I'd liked it to have been, but I'm here. And I've been here for 6 years. I do live in district housing. So after graduating from college, I ended up dating a man, married the man, and had my firstborn at 23. About 5 years after that, my then husband became extremely abusive and angry that his life wasn't the way he wanted it. And I left him. I worked 3 jobs, maintained 3 jobs while raising my daughter. And at the age of 9, or I would say 8, I started dating another man after a 4-year gap. I literally just, I needed time to myself to figure this juggling out. Really, who's dating anyone juggling 3 jobs and a child, right? So I ended up meeting another man. We dated for probably 8 months, and things were going well. And at the 1-year mark, he proposed. And at that time, things were lovely, and he was a gentleman. He opened my door for me. He worked a really good paying job. I worked, a really decent job. Now I was back down to just having 1 job, which was great. I noticed my daughter was getting sick, and but not so sick that I thought, oh, this is emergency. She then started expressing that, she was sleeping in class. The teachers were now calling me. And finally, it was my then partner that said, you need to take her to the emergency room. She does not look well. And sure enough, I take her to the emergency room in the nick of time, because she was diagnosed with an autoimmune deficiency, secondary HLH. And we nearly lost her the night they drove us to Sick Kids Hospital. And at that time, it was around January, and we were in the hospital for 6 months at Sick Kids Hospital. I was now 6 months pregnant, and I had noticed that my partner's mental health was declining fast. And my focus was clearly on my daughter. And so here she is under rounds of chemo, and being dosed up with the highest amount of steroids possible. My boss from the job that I was running, I was in management at Gymboree, and my boss, Wendy, was the most amazing and compassionate boss I had ever met, because I had worked many jobs and never had someone want to be flexible for me. And she totally understood that I was not going to be at work, clearly, but I was also going on mat leave, and she knew what that cost would look like. So she rounded up every single Gymboree in Ontario, in Canada, and then the United States to raise funds for our family, because one of the medicines that my daughter needed was at least $1,200 a month, and it was not covered. And so here we are struggling this battle, and I have all of this piling on top of me, and I'm not knowing when my baby is due. And here we go. This is my world right now. So I functioned. I think I became very robotic, and I actually deleted my Facebook account because it was just too much. I needed to focus on the survival of my daughter. So I ended up, we got out of it, thankfully. They discharged my daughter on a Friday morning, and I went into labor that very same day at 5 o'clock. And so they allowed her to stay for the weekend, because they knew that I needed to do all of the cleaning of her PICC line and take her blood pressure still and feed her the 16 different medications a day. And again, as I shared, my partner, his mental health was declining to the point that he showed up for the birth of his daughter and then went home, to our home that we had together. And after 4 days in the hospital with my little one, we ended up going to home. I had to have an emergency C-section. My little girl, my little Faith, this is her, she decided to turn around and they couldn't hear her heartbeat anymore. And they said that when they pulled her out, she had a smirk on her face. And I said, that is her personality to this day. So this little feisty gal of mine, I can only imagine the stress and duress she was under while I was pregnant with her and trying to help my oldest through what she was going through. So none of my needs are being met. None of my needs are being met because I had to be the caregiver to many. When we finally got home, my partner could no longer take it and had a mental breakdown. And I won't go into the details. It was in the newspaper. And there I was standing on the street corner with my oldest daughter with her new headdress on because she had her chemo, took all of her hair. And my youngest was in my arms just after feeding her. And I was in my nightgown listening to my neighbors talking about me and why wouldn't I see that he was no good for me, and why would I not see that this is not an environment for two little girls. And they didn't understand, I was in survival mode too. And I think I may have neglected the fact that this is what I thought security looked like, because remember, growing up, I didn't know what security looked like. So I'm carrying my childhood with me throughout my life, not recognizing that there's different resources that I was needing. I just didn't know where to obtain them. And so settling for someone who, mental health, we all want to give someone a chance. And especially if you have a family with them. So listening to, the neighbors talking about me, and I'm standing beside a police officer and there's a SWAT team, taking down my partner. And that's when I realized, I think I need to step back a little bit and focus on myself some more. So I'm homeless now because the house was actually under his name because I had student loans and I didn't want him to have to take them on. But little did I know that was me sort of being manipulated. I didn't realize that he was okay with that. So I'm now homeless, and my close friend decided to take us in. So we lived in her basement. It was a finished basement with fun shag carpeting, but that carpeting was the safest carpeting I had ever been on. We nurtured my daughter back to health. My best friend was really, she was committed to making sure I felt safe at all times. And so I became sort of kind of blissfully unaware of the world around me because I was living in a small town, a farming town, Beaton, Ontario. And I remember walking up, going for a walk with my new baby. And I walked up to the church and I decided to go inside, and the pastor happened to be there. And I walked over to him and I said, hey, do you have a minute to chat? I have this big thing just happened. And as I poured my heart out to him, he then shared, I just want to share with you that you are valuable. You are a wonderful person that has been through so much, and you are not what happened to you. And that I'm so thankful to see your smile today, and it's making a difference in my day. And as he's saying this, I start crying because I kind of flashed back to my childhood and realized that no one person had ever said that to me before. And it was really challenging because even at a young age of 7, I was taking care of my sister and being physically abused by my dad. He was so angry that his words and his fists were the only way he knew how to raise me. So here I am hearing these words for the first time, and I pulled my shoulders back and I went, yeah, oh my goodness, I am valuable. And so that was when I decided that I needed a new life. And so going forward, I finally got to live here in Muskoka. It started out in the shelter. But again, when I was in the shelter, the YWCA offered a program called Getting Ahead. And I took it, and it just spiraled my life from there. So I just wanted to open up sharing with you a little bit before we break down Maslow's hierarchy, which is what my whole life I guess I've been trying to obtain that sort of the tiers, the pyramids. So I will move on to the next slide here. So I'm going to share with you that I have the honor of working for the YWCA Muskoka, where we envision a future where all women and girls are thriving. YWCA Muskoka champions positive change for women and girls through education, leadership, and advocacy. And I have the honor of saying that while participating in these programs, I started learning more and more about my value and about who I could be in a community after feeling so broken and beaten. In many ways, my spirit, and everyone used to say, Cal, you're like the most bubbly person we know. And I had lost that for so many years because I was in survival mode. And then I realized, am I affecting my own daughters with this? So I am completely appreciative of this organization that I get to work for now that I've been on this new journey. So we are collaborating with GAP. And if anyone's familiar with GAP, they're not just about food. That may be how GAP started, Gravenhurst Against Poverty started. Marlene Buwalda, I know there are many others that started this with Marlene, but Marlene, the minute I met this woman, my heart just felt so connected because of the sense of peace that she just brought in sort of respecting me as an individual in the community, nothing else. I didn't have a label to her. I didn't have, she didn't have any expectations other than have a conversation. And that was, another part of this piece of my puzzle that was something was always expected of me. So I decided to start sitting on the steering committee as lived experience to maybe potentially help the neighbors in our community understand, our steering committee is a network of people from our community. If you're familiar, check out the website. It's an incredible website. It's been very updated and it's so great and engaging. And actually this recording will be posted there. So if you have friends, please share. But GAP has now expanded to understanding that a community not only just needs food, but they need individuals to thrive. And in order to do that, they needed to look at all the barriers in place. And so mental wellness is another aspect of GAP, as well as transportation. But the sense of community that you get, if you ever get the chance to volunteer for GAP, the Thursday production before COVID was impressive. I had the honor of going for one of the lunches. I took one of the leaders from my Circles program that I run to lunch. And they said, let's go to GAP. And I thought, you're right. I've never experienced a GAP lunch before. Let's do this. And when you walked in, it wasn't a typical food. I don't know how to explain it. You felt so comfortable walking in there and everybody's smiling. And, even the participants who, any of the neighbors that are sitting at these tables, we're all going through stuff. Everybody does. But the laughter and the joy that was coming from that room was so welcoming. And I remember having this lunch and being served. It wasn't a lunch line where you went up and you took your sandwich and you took your, vegetables and you took your juice. You were actually being served. And it felt so dignifying. It was a lovely lunch. And so then I volunteered to help out in the kitchen. And I am a definite klutz. And I thought, oh, am I going to make this worse? No, I didn't, thankfully. But they had, I think there was like 12 volunteers in total helping on that lunch day. And so now during COVID, it is well over, 65 plus volunteers helping to drive food weekly, helping to prepare the food, helping to get the food. We have a collaboration happening with Second Harvest. We have a chef that's preparing delicious gourmet meals. It is incredible. And I see Amy Snow has popped on here and, welcome Amy. And Amy is a part of that. Our whole community is coming together to create a stable, secure place for our neighbors. So it's an incredible organization. I will talk all day about them, but I'm going to move forward. So with the YWCA, we have a 3-pillar part to our project. So Getting Ahead is the project that or the workshop that I attended. It was 12 to 15 weeks of learning about where I was at, where our community was at, and that my life was bigger than my situation. And it gave me a chance to sort of process weekly with about 15 other individuals who were all going through the same thing. And we all had that mentality of, oh my goodness, you know, is this really all my life is going to be? No, it's not. And we worked through a community assessment. We worked through an individual assessment. We looked at our resources and were they lacking anything? And if they were, how could we improve that? And same with our community. And at the end of this, at the end of the 15 weeks, we had the honor of inviting community members. So we had invited, you know, I think Mayor Aitchison was the mayor at the time in Huntsville. We invited Major Darren from the Salvation Army, Heather Berg from the table. We had Jeffrey Osler from the district. We had so many people attend from our community to see all the hard work that we were doing. And from that, we planted the seed of sort of the second food harvest mentality. You know, are there ways that we could increase our food bank portions to having more roundabout? Could we have more dairy? Could we have more meat? Is there a way to collect food that, you know, you know, when they slap on a 30% off, you know, on a package of meat, is there a way that that can get donated so that we're all getting, everybody's equal? And then the other one was about transportation and how can we improve our transportation. So it was wonderful to see all of our hard work and these members in our community that had power because of where they worked, be able to collaborate something. And it was, it gave us a voice. The second part of this project is Bridges Out of Poverty. And that's where we ask community partners, you know, those that may be attending today that have never been to a Bridges would have a better lens of what poverty actually looks like. And I'll break down the get a job mentality in a moment, but when we tell someone just go get a job, we're not understanding how demeaning that can really be to an individual, because no one chooses to be poor. That's not a choice that, you know, when you're born, it's an instinct to want to dream, but reality sets in, right? So the third part to our project is Circles Muskoka. So Circles is actually a bigger, you know, concept. It started in the United States, still going strong there. It then branded out about 12 years ago to Lambton County in Canada. Gail Montgomery is the waymaker for this. She attended the Bridges Out of Poverty in the United States and brought it into Canada. And now we have the honor of running two sites. We have one in Circles North, which is in Huntsville, and then the Circles South Muskoka is in Bracebridge and Gravenhurst area. And so the Getting Ahead participants that have a dream or a goal, and they have that drive, they want to continue on, but they don't know how, they attend Circles as a leader. And then the community partners that come to Bridges Out of Poverty, if they want to continue on with this initiative, they get to have a coffee with me, which is great, or Liz. And we say, yes, you would be a great ally to one of our leaders because of these skill sets that you have and because of your understanding. Would you walk alongside someone and help them out of poverty and form a reciprocal friendship? It's as easy as forming a relationship. I say that, and we all know relationships can be very hard. And that's my role as the Circles coach. I try to navigate, you know, the conversations that happen and keep the peace. But generally, it becomes this big family. So again, I will talk for days about this project, so I will move on. So Abraham Maslow is the reason why we're here. So he is a Jewish American psychologist, philosopher, who was sort of, you know, listening to people and having them share their problems and their needs, and he wasn't quite grasping the fact, or no, he grasped the fact that, hey, how could we make one's life feel more purposeful for an individual? And so when he did that, he wrote the theory in 1964 about the hierarchy of needs. So this is the hierarchy. So when we look at 1, your basic needs, 2 is your security, 3 is love and belonging, and 4 is your esteem, and 5 is when we get those big dreams happening. And so I'm going to break them down by each slide here. So with your basic needs, we understand that these basic needs are non-negotiable. Every human born into this world deserves food, air, water, healthcare, housing, sleep, and a healthy relationship. And in order to get to the healthy relationship component, if you're so busy fighting for those basic needs, you have a one-track mind, and it's survival. You're not thinking past whether or not you have these items in place. And it's a challenge because there are millions, we know about millions of people going without them. So if you take a moment right now and pause and think, have I met someone who has a one-track mind, who potentially just tells me about their problems or what's going on in their life, or the fact that they're always asking for help for one of these items, potentially money to get one of these items, or complains about housing, or complains about how they were treated, at the hospital. We also understand that all of us go through, whether or not we have our basic needs met. But when you are in that sort of second tier or third tier of economic structure, it's a less worry, if that makes sense. Because an individual who lives under that low income poverty line, it's a juggle. Every single day they wake up, it's hard for them to get out of bed if 1 or 2 or 3 or all of these are not in place. So this is what it would look like in a perfect world. Everyone would have their air, their health care, a healthy relationship, a safe house, safe, affordable house. Your food would be met, and of course you'd sleep, because you know that tomorrow you're going to wake up to this perfect world. And I'm not saying that everyone has a perfect world. We know that everyone goes through things. But an individual that's living in poverty, this is what their life looks like. You have the insecurity of housing. You don't know if you get to even have a tent, or could you even imagine sleeping in a tent on the side of a street, having passersby, or having your items stolen that may be the only items you've ever owned. Poverty can be extremely isolating, so you tend to push people away. You don't want to form relationships. The only relationships you form are out of survival. I know that if I speak to Joe at this one organization, they'll get me an extra loaf of bread. So I'm going to be really nice to Joe today again. And you may sit back and think, do you really have to make those choices to be nice to someone? Yeah, you do, because you're constantly in a tyranny type state where your brain doesn't really register language properly, or it's not registering how to connect because you've been rejected for so long. It's creating a trauma, which is a mental health. And so, we look at the healthy relationship factor. What does that even look like? It's all based on survival. There's no way you're working. If you don't have a home, you're not working. How do you have a shower every single day to either wake yourself up? That's most of our routines. We wake up, we have a shower, we have a coffee, we get to maybe have some breakfast, then we can go put our clothes on, whatever our morning routine looks like. An individual that's in poverty, whether or not they have a job, doesn't look like that. And so they're completely exhausted all the time. And you think about your hunger and your thirst. If we're dehydrated at work, our first instinct is to go get some water. If you don't have access to clean water, how does that happen? Or if you've ever experienced hunger before, do you know the difference between being hungry and hunger and what that feels like? I myself, as a single parent, trying to juggle all of my jobs on lack of sleep and raising a child, I would go with meals for 1 and 2 days in order to make sure that my daughter had what she needed, because I knew that if I ate, that extra apple, I had to balance it out with something else that, okay, well then maybe I'll just give her an extra snack pack, or maybe I'll just send her to the breakfast program. They were running at that time, but she didn't like going because then she was admitting that they didn't have food. But not only that, what used to happen was if you admitted you didn't have food, Children's Aid were at your door. And so we all juggle parenting to the best of our abilities. She was in a loving and nurturing home, and I made sure she had food. That was my goal, my primary goal, but it neglected me. And so when I was at work, my boss would always have like cookies, and she actually had a fruit bowl in the back for the employees because she knew that we all worked hard. And so, yes, I would have one of those bananas. I remember just eating, in one day, my meal would consist of a can of tuna, a little container of yogurt, and a fruit. That was it. That's all I ate in one day. And I walked 5 kilometers a day to and from work to save $25 a week in bus fare in order to have that extra $100. And so this was over 15 years ago. And so you think about now and how, what we're going through economically, the challenges that we're facing. So our community and social housing. So again, we know that we're in a housing crisis. I have an individual in my group who has a family of four children, her and her partner, and they are challenged right now with finding every winter a decent home. They have a home in the summer, but in the winter time they have a challenge, and we've been looking for the past 2.5 years an affordable place for them to live. She works full-time as a PSW. She's an incredible, motivated woman who just wants a home for her family. But this is what we're going through. The wait list is over 8 years. It may be declining because we are having new builds happen in Muskoka, but the new builds are only for singles or a double. This is a family of 4 with mixed gender. They all need a room. The age range is from 3 to 16. And mom and dad deserve to have their own room as well. And so if we look at the average rental price at being $1,200 plus utilities for just a 1-bedroom, someone making minimum wage, which living wage is roughly in par with Simcoe County right now at $18.04 an hour. The government has stated that rent should be no more than 30% of your working income. That means it should be $685, half the amount. So if we have a majority of people paying more than half of their income on rent, what's happening to their food source? What's happening to paying the hydro? What's happening to those other basic needs? My daughter needs a new pair of shoes. My daughter can't join dance group like all her friends. My son wants to play soccer or hockey. And these are all things that kids deserve the chance to experience. But unfortunately, if we're paying so much money on our rent, it's not happening. Again, feel free if you guys have questions or if I'm going too fast, please type it in the chat box and I'll answer. So when we look at food in food security in Muskoka, 1 in 8 Simcoe Muskoka homes are food insecure, and only 1 in 4 food insecure people will visit a food bank. Biggest reason, transportation. We live in such a vast rural area that it takes me 45 minutes to come down to Bracebridge for work. And that's because I like to drive the speed limit. First of all, I don't want to get in trouble with the police, but secondly, my car doesn't like going fast. It's a little old lady car, but I'm very grateful for her. So if I'm thinking, my resources are that far away, how do I get to that on a weekly basis? So these are all, now there are some that aren't listed. I know that there are others. These were the ones that I could find logos for, but I know right now for GAP, because sitting on the committee, over 685 meals a week are being delivered because of COVID. We're reaching more because of delivery. So it is amazing to see that, these people these individuals that were hungry before are getting these gourmet meals. And so it's incredible that You know, we're reaching many, and now people aren't afraid to come in. I can actually share with you, you know, coming out of my 8-year abusive relationship and finally getting the chance to move into a safe home here in Muskoka. I remember stepping into the food bank for the very first time and how afraid I was because I didn't know what to expect. And so I lived in Huntsville. I lived just down the road from the table. And I remember walking in there for the first time, standing in line and just feeling like everybody knew my situation. And I remember looking up and seeing the words, "You are loved." And again, not something I heard very often. And the minute I saw that, I thought, this can't be a horrible place. So I got asked to register myself. So I was taken into an office and the volunteer was asking basic questions: your name, your age, your address, and your income, you know, your income amount. And I remember sharing these things and feeling sort of traumatized that I had to share this information. And then I thought, this person has power over me, that I may not get food if I say the wrong thing. And these are basic questions. But my identity as a woman was completely lost because of all that I had just endured in the last 8 years, let alone 2 years with my daughter having cancer, having a baby, getting kicked out of my home. Like, I had all this trauma that those basic questions were very hard to answer. And I started tearing up. And this volunteer gently softened her voice and said, "It's okay. It's okay to be here. It's okay. Let's go. Let me walk you around and show you that it's okay to be here." And so she walked me around and showed me how the system worked. It was very confusing for my brain because this was new and I was scared. But she sort of just walked me through. And at the end, she, you know, took all of my things from my basket and then pulled a basket from behind the counter because I did have to share that I had 2 children in order to get more food. And she said, "I have some treats for your daughters." And so then I looked at her and I'm actually tearing up because it was the most gentle experience I had had. Going to the food bank became easier over time. And what I realized, what I was gaining from the food bank wasn't just food. I was gaining a healthy relationship with someone. And even though this someone was a new volunteer each week, it was a relationship that I never knew existed because of how my whole life was. And I knew that I needed to rely on this food bank. And so I actually wanted to volunteer at this food bank. I was just so busy volunteering in other areas in the community. But that's exactly what going to the food bank did for me. A, it saved my life because I don't know where I would have been. And B, it was helping me form relationships when I was so scared to leave my own home. I remember it gave me the opportunity to volunteer for Christine's Place. I volunteered there about 20 hours a week. I did peer support. I hosted the cutie pie lunch. I connected with other moms who were going through the same things I was going through and even shared with them, "I will go with you to this food bank if you're not going." So not only is it transportation, but it's fear of being judged, fear of you know, not being good enough and having that label placed on you, or fear of hearing someone say, "Go get a job, you won't need this anymore." So the food banks in our community, the volunteers that work in every single food bank have been wonderful. Every now and then we know that someone's having a bad day. And so sometimes I take it on myself to smile bigger and check in with whoever's volunteering. And that's because of all of the support that they've offered me. The second tier to Maslow's hierarchy is security. So we look at the diagram on number 2. We have safety, time. Time is so valuable, and yet when you're in poverty, you're so busy looking for your basic needs that your time management is either really bad or it's spent on surviving. And so you really don't have the option to have the luxury of, joining an art class or volunteering in an organization that would really boost you up. Ownership, security, employment, and financial resources. So we know that security is part of getting a job. But again, you need to have that basic tier met, the needs in your basic tier met in order to move into the second tier. And so when we tell someone just go get a job, you've already bypassed the fact that you need to have other things in place in order to keep that job and do a really well job at that employment opportunity. So if we go to this, so this is where I shared with you that just go get a job mentality. We understand a job is important. Finances are important. There's no denying this. And not everyone doesn't want a job. There are people that are living in tents that would say, I would love to work at this job. I've seen the men working at this construction site and they look like they are all friends and that they, probably go and have a beer after work, or that they've put a hard day's work in and look at our new roads because of it. Who doesn't want a job that feels purposeful? I remember growing up saying, I want a job as an art psychologist and work with kids who were troubled. But I never knew how to get there because I didn't have a dad who could show me the steps to get through school and dream big and go and apply all of the hard work to those dreams. It was something that I learned from relationships within my community with, the lady at the library I would chat with very often, and her soft tone of voice would offer me hope to read a new book. And so I became an avid reader and I escaped in books, and those books gave me ideas. But then when I got home, those ideas became null and void because I had to continue to survive for myself and my sister. So again, when we say just go get a job, what are we telling that individual? We're telling them basically that you have a job and it makes you feel valid and important. And we know that it would make this individual feel valid and important. But do we also have all of our basic needs met? And do we have all of these things in place? How is your security being affected currently? Everyone is experiencing COVID. Everyone. Even if we think, working from my basement and still having a job makes me feel like I'm important because I have this job, you're still being affected. Every individual that we look at with a mask is being affected by COVID. We are losing our sense of security of ourselves in this world, let alone the job that we used to be able to do has now been either moved digitally or it's being challenged by the fact that we can't even hug one another for a job well done. And those rewards, I know that words are empowering as well, but when you can get a high five from someone, I don't know, that's my thing. I love high fiving. It's a connection, right? And we're all being made to stay away from one another, and our houses are being affected, the way we live inside our homes, let alone if we even have a home. And so taking a step back to understand that our security can be taken away at any given moment, but there are those that don't even know what security looks like. I have another individual in our Circles program who is working so hard for her and her son. She's 15 years sober now, clean from drugs and alcohol. Her son is, he's been affected by COVID in a way that he likes to do gaming. And you know what? That's a healthy outlet because he's inside doing gaming. He's not out there doing drugs or being, a nuisance in the community like a teen would. He's doing something that's sort of making him feel valid. She's in university courses. She studies her butt off. And outside her door, there are drugs being passed around. There is that yelling from abusive situation happening a couple doors down. And all she wants to do sometimes is to go and sit in her backyard, but she's afraid to. This has been going on long before COVID. So her sense of security has been neglected. There are many that are going through this. And even though we sometimes have a roof over our head, that's just shelter. That's not a home. So love and belonging. Oh, so 47. So Tracy, thank you so much for sharing this. But Tracy's sharing with us that she had a great job, a house, and living the dream, and then had a stroke at 47 and changed her life forever. So, oh my goodness. So it was all taken away from you after building up so much, and your security was taken for granted. And, you know, it's something that we all have in us, that we just live this sort of life blindly, not knowing that there are others that are going without. But I think we're becoming more aware, and we're offering a healthy relationship to someone because we're recognizing this. I can't imagine how that's making you feel now, you know, with that new sense of identity. So our love and belonging is on tier 3, healthy relationships, family, and being loved. When you are living in the, you know, those situations where you don't have proper secure housing or food, think about the term hangry, right? We've all been there. We've all maybe missed a lunch, or, you know, didn't eat breakfast that morning, and by lunchtime you're feeling very irritable. You're upset with, you know, someone drawing crown on a table. No big deal, you can wash it up. But because you're so hungry, it feels like they scraped the darn out of that table with a knife, and you are never going to repair that because you're focused on the fact that you hadn't eaten. Your belly's so upset, right? There are individuals that have not eaten for days, and we wonder why crime rates go up when things like this happen, when individuals are continuously in and out of jail, which, don't get me started on that topic. We're starting to identify that jail is not the option, that we need to figure out secondary resources. Let's start by looking at mental health. The trauma of being in poverty does not allow for you to be hardwired to have a healthy relationship with anyone, to keep your family in check. What if your family was only knew addiction? What if mom, dad, and older brother only knew of addiction, and you are trying to get out of this situation? Are you going to be someone who also falls into the barrier of being an addicted person, or are you going to get yourself out? It's more than likely that you too will become an addicted member of this family as well. And so when we can form a healthy relationship with someone outside of our family home, that's when things open up. So we have to break free from the norm. It's uncomfortable, it's change, no one likes change and putting themselves out there socially, but if we do it, it's a stepping stone to seeing the world with different eyes. And so it's when we form those healthy relationships at our food banks that we're starting to see past, this is all I deserve. Being loved is hard. When you've only been told that you're a nuisance in life and that you are not going to amount to anything, that, you know, the world doesn't really need another person just, you know, schwelping off the system, that's not being loved. That's not even being shown love. And so, as I shared with you, when I saw the words, "you are loved," I looked at it and I thought, well, maybe it can't be such a bad place. My trust was still not there. I had to actually see it in action. And so as I shared, the volunteer took me aside and used a nice tone with me, and, you know, didn't really, she looked at me with kind eyes. I shared that about Marlene. Every single time I walk into one of these organizations, I'm seeing a loving, kind face. They're not busy to talk to me. They're putting their sort of agendas aside to have 10 to 15 minutes with me. Their day is probably jam-packed with 1,000,001 things to do, but they're taking the time to get to know me in those 15 minutes by just looking me in the eyes and making me feel valid. The more we can do that for an individual, the more they begin to understand that they're worthy of being loved. The most basic human desire is to feel like you belong. Fitting in is important. We had a Christmas program, and actually this is very correlated to a TED Talks that I witnessed. Kristen Miall breaks down Maslow's hierarchy, and I think that's where I got the idea to do this, but I wanted to go in depth with human story, right? She shared about working for a food bank and how there was a Christmas tree with items on it. And this couple that came in saw this and said, well, we want to sponsor a family. And, the kids were asking for things like Nike shoes and UGG boots and, a gaming system. And they began to say, well, we don't even do that for our own kids. We can't afford that for our own kids. Why do they deserve that? And so funny thing, at Circles, we have amazing sponsors that at Christmas time, they give their hearts to understanding the desire to belong. In our society, things make you feel like you belong. When you can wear a shirt that says Adidas on it, or have the little alligator, I think that's Lacoste. Like I'm not big on labels because I've never known them, but when you can have these sort of name brand items or the fancy shiny things that every other person has, of course you're going to want those things. I just want a home. I live in district housing and I just want a home. I don't care what my home looks like. I'm willing to even participate in a home that's on wheels that moves so that I can travel, whatever it looks like. I just want a home that I feel safe in. Everyone has a need, and it's up to you to make yourself feel like you belong. But when society tells us that you need to have these fancy things in order to belong, of course you're going to ask for them. And so it's hard to hear individuals say, well, I never had that, and I think it's ridiculous that they're asking for that. It breaks my heart, because there may have been a time that the individual who's making that statement asked for something and couldn't get it themselves. And so their heart is broken because they had to live with going without as well. And that's generally, I try my best to take a step back and think, where is that statement coming from? So moving along, so we're at esteem, prestige, recognition for accomplishments are in tier 4. Once you have your first 3 tiers met, number 4 happens. You are now working at a job that you, A, really love, or B, it's at least getting food on your table and helping you get through life. You may have a coworker that sort of plants those, you're really good at art. Why don't you go to art school? And just even saying that out loud may help this individual think, you're right. Maybe I'm just doing this to pay for my tuition. And maybe they know someone who knows how to get the money for them to pay for the tuition. And all of a sudden now you're starting to get recognized for these accomplishments that, you're bringing in your sketchbook and you're showing someone, look what I just drew last night. Look at what's going on in here. This is what I'm doing here. And all of a sudden now you're feeling like you're part of something big. You're having great conversations about dreaming big and hoping big and wanting the world to seem, bigger than you are. So you're starting to get recognized for accomplishments. And so this is, I fell in love with this statement. So appreciation can make a day, even change a life. Your willingness to put it into words is all that is really necessary. So even if an individual comes into, an organization where they have to hand in paperwork is probably the hardest thing to fill out when your brain is full of survival. It is invasive. It makes you feel frustrated and upset. So if an individual says, can I please just bring this home and I'll fill it up, then allowing them that time to do it because they're organizing their thoughts. When they come back and they hand you this paperwork all filled out, you simply saying to them, wow, you came back in such a timely fashion. Thank you so much. And oh my goodness, your handwriting, it's gorgeous. Right there, you're appreciating this person for taking the time, for even working hard to make it legible. And as small as that seems, you've made a difference in their day, because it was probably really hard for them to even sit down, focus, and do that work. Appreciation it's plentiful around the YWCA organization. I feel like every single day that we come into work, someone is complimenting something about how hard we're working. And we even hear it from the participants from our programs. And it drives passion. It makes me want to continue achieving 110%. Every time I sit on a steering committee, same thing. I'm hearing, great job. You took over that challenge and you mastered it. Hey, you were volunteering on Thursday. Oh my goodness, the way you were packing those bags, we got so much food in them. It's plentiful. I'm noticing it more. And I don't know if it's because I'm starting to appreciate what others have done for me. I'm also appreciating what I'm capable of in a day. And that's because people have planted those seeds. I can talk all day, folks. Okay, moving along. So when we get to number 5, self-actualization, development, creativity to recognize one's potential. So the other day, we have a staff meeting every Monday. And the other day we were asked, in your lifetime, have you ever looked back and realized that you've reached your potential in any situation? And everyone was sharing amazing things, something that they went for and they got it. My one coworker shared she went for it. She got a mortgage after becoming a single parent. So good. My other friend said, I managed to, put myself out there with this art display. She did it. I remember when it came to my turn, I said, I actually realized my purpose in life, and it's doing exactly what I'm doing right now. I used to be so afraid of the world. I was so scared that even going near a window, I would have a panic attack because the world was not kind to me because of my economic structure, because of how I looked, because of, maybe how I used my language. And potentially this could have been all in my head. But because I persevered and I pushed and I said yes to opportunities because I was starting to feel safe again, I am actually sitting here today sharing with you that I have met my life's purpose. Speaking for those that potentially don't know how to speak for themselves. I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak from my own experience. But because I'm all about building relationships in our community, I take the time to sit and have a sandwich with a man who's living in a tent. I do it in public. I know, be safe. Everyone says be safe because you never know. And you're right. I take the time to get to know individuals that are wandering the streets. I take the time to get to know individuals that are shopping. I take the time, and it only is eye contact, a smile, hi, how are you today? And it goes from there. If that individual doesn't have the time to talk, they're not going to talk. But I'm making the effort because I want to get to know the neighbors in our communities so that I can recognize their needs and how I can help them by doing exactly what I'm doing right now. If I can share a story or two to help someone else resonate and say, there's a man that lives at the end of our street and he's quite lonely. I'm not sure. I don't ever see garbage in his recycling bin if he eats well enough. I'm going to maybe get some food from Gap and I'm going to leave it on his doorstep for him. Those are opportunities. And if anything, you don't have to tell them who you are. They may take the food, they may not take the food. We live in an untrusting world now, unfortunately, but you don't know what that could have done for that man. But if you do it once, continue doing it because they may start to rely on that and wonder this magical food elf that's keeping, food source happening. Eventually, it might get to the time where they're looking for whoever's dropping this off and they'll catch you. And that's an opportunity for you to either say, hey, I just wanted to make a difference in your world, or I'm so sorry, I won't do it anymore. If that's all you had to hear, you've at least changed someone's life in a moment. With realization of one's own, oh my goodness, sorry gang, I can't read it because of my chat box. One moment. I hope you guys can't see this very stretched out strap. There we go. With realization of one's own potential and self-confidence in one's ability, one can build a better world. One of my favorite things to say is planting seeds. The minute you whisper to someone, I yell, I'm very loud. The minute you tell someone you matter, you've planted a seed. And that seed gets fostered by the next individual that says, you've done a great job. Now you've heard two amazing things. The next person that comes along and says, would you mind contributing to this because I think you're amazing at it? You're building the confidence in an individual that potentially thought, I'm not worth anything. And therefore, the more they do this, they become the individual that says to another person, you matter. What happens when everyone spirals into saying, you matter? That is it, my friends. So if you guys have questions, actually, it's not it. I apologize. These are the reasons why an individual moves out of poverty. Oh my gosh, my coworker helps me with my slides. She'd be like, what are you doing? Too painful to stay. You have a vision or goal. Key relationship. Notice how many times I've said relationship in today's webinar. I'm sure you guys are very annoyed with it, but it is the most valid point. And a special talent or skill. And that special or talent or skill could be you're the best darn pencil sharpener that anyone's ever seen. And if it's even as small as that, how can I use that skill? From that skill and having a relationship with someone and seeing past the fact that I can sharpen this pencil, what can I do with this, right? Too painful to stay is probably the first stepping stone, because I realized I didn't want my children to grow up the way I had. And I fought so hard for them to see past what we were living like. And so for me, saying yes to these new opportunities, to putting myself in an uncomfortable situation, like going to Getting Ahead and not knowing what it looked like, or going to the food bank for the first time, those are probably the opportunities that put me in that next stepping stone to reaching the second tier in that, in Maslow's hierarchy. And so the more and more I said yes to opportunities, the more uncomfortable it got. But it got to the point where I can say, you know, I'm on my way to owning my home one day. Not yet. We know there's a housing crisis right now and we're working on it. But while that's happening, I'm one of those individuals working on it. And so I'm grateful for the way that my life turned out, even though I had to endure all that I did. But I'm in a place now to be able to share these things with you in hopes that you are taking notes because something I've said has resonated with you, that you know an individual that's going through something or has a special talent or skill, or you are their only important source of relationship in their life. My Ontario caseworkers, went way back in the day when I lived in Barrie, not so friendly, really hard, cried every single time I had to go. They had a hard day, you could tell, but it was not my fault. And so the more and more that I was talking to individuals and, you know, just having a chance to be able to talk to someone about anything, it was really challenging. When I moved to Muskoka, my very first caseworker, again, I was scared because of the experiences I had. I cried. She pushed the Kleenex box over at me, softened her voice and said, we'll get through this. It's all in the tone of our voice. It's all in the, you know, whether or not an individual that's sitting across from you is important. And the answer is yes. Every single person that exists in our world is important. And I know that there's challenges sometimes with individuals and how they live and, you know, whether or not they have addictions or their mental health scares you. That's a human being going through something. Nancy, it says that you didn't know where to get advice, not knowing about how to get go to art school. So funny, because yes, guidance counselors, I did have one, same relationship. And as I shared with you, when you're hungry, when you're, not sleeping well, when you're, so worried about your living conditions, you shut the world out. My guidance counselor probably could have been very nice, but I was viewing them as someone who was judging me. And so I put a wall up. And so I'm not blaming that there wasn't any advice, and I'm not blaming myself for maybe not opening my heart up to receiving what this guidance counselor said. But at the time, my only source was, I don't want to get hit for not doing the dishes. I don't want to be hit for the fact that my sister didn't have her dinner set up in time. I wasn't focused on a secondary education because I didn't even know if there was going to be money for that, let alone, all the hard work that you had to do that. So I get into art school, then what? What does that world look like? Because I was never exposed to different culture growing up. I was exposed to survival. So that's the sort of idea that a lot of individuals are faced with. They don't know what outside world looks like because they're so busy day by day dealing with all the things that are thrown at them. But I appreciate that. And same with going to a job bank. It gets really challenging. It's not that I don't want a great job or that I'm unable to get the job. There's all these barriers in place, and you now have expectations on me to complete a resume when my skill set may be only sharpening pencils, right? When I feel limited, how do you dream big when you feel that you are only worth this big or this small? And that's it.